start. Welcome to the December Authority meeting. Apologies for absence. I've got Lee Baker, Theo Butt-Phillips, Christine Lawrence, Fran Smith, Susan Warren, and Marcus will arrive about 10:30. Is that right, Judy?
Yes.
Yeah. Item 2, declarations of interest. Robin?
Yep.
Jeremy? Interest?
Sorry, no. No.
Laura? No? John? And nothing from me either, thank you. Chairman's announcements. I've got quite a few, so please bear with me. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Anne and Shelley at Golverton National Park Centre. They got gold at the Bristol, Bath and Somerset Tourism Awards for Visitor Information Service of the Year. Gosh, that's a long thing to say in one sentence. So, huge congratulations to them, and we look forward to when they move into here we can see them in person and congratulate them. The government has responded to the landscapes review. We haven't got much detail. Sarah very kindly sent it out to us last week, which I'm sure you've all read. We're going to have a little discussion at members' briefing, but the meeting, I believe, is tomorrow to maybe find out a little bit more with DEFRA. And the authority is through to the first stage of the landscape recovery bid. We're now going to work with landowners and partners to develop a programme which, all being well, will lead to a 20-year funding package for Exmoor's Heartland, the former Royal Forest. And obviously our thanks go to Alex, who isn't with us today, but hopefully he'll hear this, and everyone involved in putting that bid together. And then last week, it was the week before, 22nd of November, all AONBs have become national landscapes, and this is one of the recommendations from the Landscapes Review. I won't give an opinion about this, but there we are. Item 4, minutes. Can I have a proposer and a correct record? Thank you, Jeremy. And a seconder? Mike? Thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous, Judy. Thank you. And as usual, we'll go through page by page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. And page 8. Thank you. Item 5, public speaking. Mr. Watts would like to speak on item 7. And Stephen, we'll let Stephen sit down. Do you have any interest or lobbying, Stephen?
No, but I think I might declare something against B&Q with their delivery lorries blocking Lady Street, so I'm
I'm sure Judy will put that in a minute. That's what we can do. Good to have you here. So item 6, we're going through driver, and Rob is going to take us through the report.
Good morning, members. I thought I'd indulge you with the first slide. The rest won't be such an indulgence, but I just felt this was December Authority, so I'll begin with something of public season, I should say. And just to also put you into place in terms of driver, I'm not going to elaborate on the history and the context in terms of the site. We've had all that. So I'm going to go straight into the paper. The presentation I'm going to give you will basically outline the recommendations in that paper and support those recommendations. There are no appendices to the paper, and we had a matter of internal discussion about whether this should be a pink confidential paper or whether it should be a white one. We decided on a white one on the basis that there is nothing in the paper that is commercially sensitive. previous workshop and in the 6 weeks between that workshop and today, you've all had a chance to see information that is commercially sensitive that is on Teams intranet. So you have that shared with you. So we won't be sharing that commercially confidential information today in detail. So I'll just move through the presentation in that case. So this paper concerns the land, which is about 320 hectares, nearly 800 acres at Driver, and the farmstead, the farm buildings themselves, the traditional buildings and the modern farm building, which you can see in the photograph on the left. And just to put it in context, this is very high Exmoor. It's on the south side of the chains. It runs almost up to the top of the chains. It is a mixture of enclosed farmland and moorland. Some of that moorland has been improved. Some of it, in the bottom of the photograph on the right, is still moorland. Despite drainage attempts, it is moorland with deep peat, 1.5 metres. So some of the deepest peat on Exmoor, some of the best peat on Exmoor. How we've got to today, I thought it might just be helpful in the last 7 months or so, since our tenant at Driver handed in his tenancy, came back to us.
Sorry.
I can hear it.
So since the tenancy came back to us on the 2nd of May, there's been a process which you've been taken through, and that's, I think, for us as officers, been an incredibly useful process to share our thoughts on the place and to hear your own thoughts. And that has been a regular set of things we've done. So in June we had a member site visit, if you all remember back then. We followed that up with a member and staff workshop in this room. We then gave you an update at Members Forum in October, and that culminated in a workshop just around a month ago in the middle of November. And that final workshop has very much influenced the paper. The paper was written immediately after that. So what you have in front of you is very much the culmination of all of those sessions we've had, but in particular the last workshop. So that arrives at the authority paper today and the decisions that we hope will flow from it. It's worth just reminding you, and this is in the paper as well, it's just worth reminding you that everything we're presenting today in the paper is based on at least 6 substantial work streams that have been done. Some of them since May, some over the last 12 months or so. And I just encourage you to look at that list and on the right the people involved. So we have done quite a few of the work streams ourselves, but we've also worked in collaboration with consultants or solely to consultants in a sense, or working through consultants. So the Farm Environment Survey was the first piece of work to be done, and basically was done to inform us of what the capacity of that land was, what that land was in terms of special qualities, but also what it could be. So that was the Farm Environment Survey. We also, the house, you've all seen the house, we needed to understand what the options were for the refurbishment of the house, and we also needed to understand what the cost of that refurbishment would be and of any attendant infrastructure there. We're very conscious that the site is off-grid and currently has a diesel generator and oil-fired central heating, and it goes without saying we can do a lot better than that. So we also employ consultants, specialist consultants, to look at do an audit of what we had there, but in particular, based on that, to look at the sustainable energy arrangements that we might bring in there, as and when we can fund them. We also, in Andrew's team, the charity Winfield, who's the assistant rural surveyor, did a modelling of farm viability, so what business model that place can support and what will be needed there. And then finally, there was a carbon and nature assessment which was done gratis by Wilder Carbon, who are an arm, I think is the right way to put it, of the Kent Wildlife Trust. And that piece of work we shared with you, along with all the others at the previous workshop. I also just wanted to sort of just say that in some ways it's probably things that you
may not see is that Driver has sparked a lot of creative imagination, bottom right, not least amongst the entire staff team. I've been here for too long to say, but in the time I've been here, I don't think I've ever seen so much interest in any of our assets or in anything we've done, actually. The entire staff team have helped in all of these work strands in various ways, from planning to IT. So it's been a very interesting year for me, I think. But also, there's been a lot of work out on the ground. So the people on the left there are looking at Devil's Bit scabious and looking at the existing habitat that Driver has and the ability it has to support certain species like marsh fritillary butterflies that aren't currently there, and how that habitat can be improved. And we've also, using some of our lottery development money, the Exmoor Pioneers lottery funding, we've also done some work out there, which in lottery terms called trial activities. So it's seeing how people can be engaged in some aspects of that part of Exmoor. And the guy on the right there, this was in the glorious mud of last week, doing some dry stone walling, not on Driver itself, but nearby. So just to remind you of the recommendations in the paper, there are three, or there are two rather, and then an attendant one. One is to approve the retention of Driver, which is in line with our retention and disposals policy 2019. The second one is to approve the allocation of significant capital investment for the house and modern farm buildings and associated infrastructure there. And that money will be secured we've taken from land sales. As you know, we have a series of assets that are for sale at the moment. It is not yet secured. So that's an in-principle approval of the spending of that money. And also the allocation of 50,000 from our reserves for the renovation of the house at Driver. So that's, I'll come to the spreadsheet with the costings further down. And then the third one is, and those of you who were at the workshop last month will remember, we presented a number of operating models for Driver. I'll take you through the two that we felt were the most viable ones, and we wanted a bit more work on that. So it's to note that we will agree the operating model in the first half of 2024. I'm not going to say any more about that at the moment. I'll come to that in due course as I work through. Again, just as you know, and we've discussed it a number of times, Driver is part of a wider group of assets across the Royal Forest. Driver sits at the extreme western end and is contiguous with Pinkery. Pinkery is the outdoor education centre, there's a little red box there, and Driver, the holding, is just to the east of it. But you notice that to the north, the Chains, X-Plain, Lanarcombe, Pinford, and all the way through to Larkborough is our most extensive land holding. And of all that land holding, which is moorland, the only bits that have enclosed land are at Driver and Pinkery, so are the subject of this paper today. So the first recommendation is to approve the retention of Driver in line with our retention and disposals policy, and I hope it will help to just explain how we got to that sort of conclusion. When considering what to do with an existing property asset, the authority's starting point will be a presumption in favour of disposal unless there is a compelling case for retention. The following questions will be considered when the assessment is made. Does it have a core value in delivering national park purposes? Is there potential for enhancement or unlocking latent value in the future? There are a series of other requirements for us to go through, which we have done. But these we feel are the two most pertinent ones here because of the scale of the land. So the context that we make this recommendation, the context in which we make the recommendation is the Nature Recovery Vision, which was approved in 2021. And you will see from the extract that I've given you there that there's a very large sketched circle on the part of Exmoor that includes the Royal Forest. And the red splodge is Driver, the land holding there. Now, that circle drawn there is one of the nature recovery hubs. We have some incredibly challenging targets for the Nature Recovery Vision by 2030 and by 2050. And we see Driver as to use the inevitable pun, as a sort of driver for our ambitions there. It is hard to think that we will progress to achieve the nature recovery vision without pushing on our own land as a whole. It's a significant asset in that area, and we see Driver as part of that and a necessary part of that. Partly because it has infrastructure there, so it offers us buildings, but it also offers us enclosed land and the chance to do different things, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. And then if I take you back less far than 2021, to the estate strategy, which was approved in 2023, so just a few months ago. I won't read it out to you, but we see, I've taken this extract, which is from the mission statement from the estate strategy, which I think shows that we need to have ambition for our land. We need to be very, very grounded in the finances, but we also need to be aspirational about what we can achieve against the nature and climate emergency. So if we then turn to Driver itself and the land, the information here, I've summarised it very simply. You've got a map which is incredibly detailed there. But I think the four main things to hang on to here in terms of how we further national park purposes at Driver. After peatland restoration, as I alluded to at the beginning, we have some of the best and deepest peat on Exmoor on the Chains, which is immediately north of Driver, but that blanket bog comes into the holdings Driver itself at the very top of the holding. Some restoration work's been done on there. There is a lot more to do, and that we see as absolutely achieving park purposes. The plans that the conservation team have come up with for Driver involve a model of regenerative farming, which essentially includes wood pasture. So we see woodland creation across the holding as well. It's still farmland, but wood pasture will be a key part of that. We have, through FIPL, we have our Sow the Seeds project, and the team have been out there looking at the opportunities for meadow creation and enhancement. So we see grassland and improving the grassland across the holding, particularly on the higher slopes, as absolutely fundamental. And then last of all, this is the headwaters of the River Barle, so it's one of the two significant rivers on Exmoor. I have to be careful how I say that, because conscious people, that might not be how some people see it, but the Barle and the Ex, I guess, are the two significant south-flowing ones. There we are, I've got myself out of it. So the headwaters of the Barle are within the holding here, and slow the flow measures are absolutely essential for contributing to the alleviation of downstream flooding. So we see natural flood management partly as an alleviation of flooding, but also in terms of habitat creation on the floors of the coombe as they come down. So those four things I think you can hang on to as where we see national park purposes being delivered strongly on the holding. I think it'd be very remiss of me not to just talk about the partly happen chance of timing and funding. We have worked really hard as a staff team to get external funding in, as the chairman referred to at the beginning of the meeting. And I think it's worth seeing Driver in the context of that. It's not all about Driver. We can put that on record. It's not all about Driver, but there is something about our wider aspirations for this part of Exmoor being directly relevant to the decisions today. So, as you know, we have secured lottery funding for the Exmoor Pioneers programme, and assessments have been done on Driver in terms of how we can deliver some of the nature recovery projects there that we would like to do. We've just secured from DEFRA landscape recovery funding, literally last week, for something called Exmoor Heartlands, which is the Royal Forest of Exmoor and beyond, so it includes Brendon Common and land holdings out beyond. So it's a very significant area, and Driver is a tiny speck of that, but nevertheless it is absolutely germane. And then we've also worked hard, the estates team have worked very hard to put together a countryside stewardship application for Driver, which is pretty ambitious and brings more funding. And then finally, and almost, I think it was all last week we've secured approval from the national FIPL team for a grant for one of the traditional farm buildings at Driver. So we're one of the first to get through the panel nationally. So we have external funding from FIPL nationally to be spent on the traditional farm, the eastern range of the traditional farm buildings at Driver. I have to say, in a world of sort of ups and downs, that's quite a lot of ups, I think, in terms of this being relevant. So I'll move on to the second recommendation, which is the allocation of £550,000 from land sales. As I said originally, that those sales are not yet secured, so this is an approval in principle, and the allocation of £50,000 from reserves for the renovation of the house of Driver. Compared to the modern farm buildings, which I have to say, as landlord, we have underinvested in those buildings. They are not in a good state of repair, and so in a sense, this is catch-up from underinvestment in the past, and for other capital works on the farmstead. This is a summary of the capital budget. Shall I pass over to you, Andrew, just to go through it?
Actually, the cost. So, just running through the capital budget, the big numbers really are centred around the farmhouse and buildings. So, we've got a budget figure of 232 for the farmhouse refurbishment, which does deal with significant improvements and also reconfiguring it so it can operate as a B&B by the operator if they choose to, or indeed us for working holidays. There's some contingency in there and some fees. I think we would want to increase that contingency moving forward, and that is what we will continue to do. The East Barn renovation, that's a grant-funded project. That's £175,000. That does see a new slate roof. There's some CDM project management fees in there again. The modern building is a part knock down and replace because it's in a parlour state and not fit for purpose, and also will accommodate some array of PVs on the top as well once reconstructed. So that demolition and rebuild is £175,000. Some landscaping in there, and then our sustainability and power and services is again a budget figure prepared by our consultants of £87,000. So the capital requirement is just short of £740,000 that will be resourced primarily from land sales, and we have some property on the market at the moment, which we have the main one being East Anstey Common, where there is some interest in that which we're pursuing. In addition to land sales, as Rob said, we've been lucky in securing the first round at least of the FIPL, which generates £140,000 to East Barn, and then that's supported by £50,000 from our reserve, which makes up that capital ask. Thank you. And then the final part of the recommendations is just to note that the operating model for Drive will be agreed in 2024, in the first half of 2024. For those of you who weren't at the workshop, and just to remind those of you who were, I think the workshop we went for options 3 and 4, so confusingly I've changed those to option A and B now, because option 1 and 2 have gone. So the house and traditional farm buildings are operated by NPA staff, and an operating model would be to put the Exmoor Pioneers programme in there for 5 years, so it would be the base of the Exmoor Pioneers programme, and the land would be let out on a grazing licence. And the second option, option B, is that the house, the buildings and all of the land are let to a tenant on a 10-year farm business tenancy. And as we say, I'll get out at the bottom there, which goes back to the workshop, is that there are variants of these models. Inevitably there are variants of these models, which is why we think we have a little bit more work to do there to finalise the operating model. What I would say is that whichever of these models is chosen, the 2 recommendations at the top stand, whichever way we go on the precise detail of the operating model. We think both of these are viable. It's a matter of working that through. So, in terms of this paper and what it's asking, just to summarise it, and I'm not sure if this is helpful to you, but in terms of the land, we intend to let the tenancy. We intend to let the grass in the spring, and we will begin a programme of capital works funded by the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. That would be the intention. For the house, there is
quite a lot of procurement to do, and then refurbishment, and we'd aim to complete that in the autumn. And you can imagine building works up at Driver, you don't do them at this time of the year. You have to decide when the summer has come. It only comes when it's ready. So these timescales, that's why they're broad and not monthly. For the farm buildings, I've distinguished modern and traditional. Again, there is, as Andrew's alluded to, there is a programme of rebuilding of the modern farm buildings, and that is out of necessity because they are at end of life, and we see that as a necessary step in order to take Driver forward towards a model that is much more about regenerative farming. You can't do it at that altitude without those buildings, in the short term at least. We might be able to develop a model beyond this, but for now those repairs are necessary. And in the traditional buildings, we intend to use the FIPL funding if it gets. I think it's quite an elaborate process for FIPL. There's a national panel, then there's a local panel, and there's a Historic England judgment then that's made about the funding. But as far as we're concerned, we have in principle funding for the from the national team at FIPL. If for some reason that funding didn't come all the way through to us, then we would delay on those the repairs to the traditional barn. We wouldn't. So it's worth saying that some of these the traditional buildings and other repairs like that, and other development of the site, like diversification options, is something we will fund from external sources. And I've said this previously to you. The ongoing operating model for Driver has to wash its own face. It cannot draw on the definite core grant. We won't let it. And then the operating model that we're looking at, as I say, we will spend the first few months of next year developing those options A and B and refining those. And I think it's a matter for you how you would like us to share that with you. We can bring it as another paper. We can involve a member group in that process. I would stress I think for us it's a strongly financial item. It's to do with land management, but it is strongly financial because the business model that we have there has to be a robust one. The operating model has to be a very robust one. And then the other two at the bottom, just we feel a need. There's so much potential activity at Driver, the need for some sort of overarching landscape plan. I've been put right by Sarah on that one, but just reminded me of my instincts in terms of landscape. So we need some sort of overall plan that brings things together properly, and a communications plan, because at this stage, until you make a decision today, there is no comms, and we haven't prepared a press release, but we'll probably do so after this meeting, depending on the decision. Thank you. Sorry, that was quite a long paper, but I think it was necessary.
Thank you. I've already got one person with their hand up. Robin.
Thanks, Andrea. Well, I think this is a really exciting opportunity here, and it's somewhat different from what my first impression would have been over Driver, I must admit. So I've got a couple of questions, but first of all, I'd like to move the recommendations. And secondly, just a question probably for Chief Finance Officer over there, really. Are you content that the level of risk here is manageable financially within the authority budgets? That's the first one. And I suppose secondly, as we move forward, are you at what point or what kind of scale? You've put 2024 for determining what the options will be. I think in the speed of change which is happening on everything at the moment, as soon in 2024 rather than later will be better, and I don't know whether you would agree with that or not. And around marketing and opportunities, just to mention that I've been made really aware that if we go ahead with this, there are several national organisations that would be absolutely delighted to join us in ensuring that a sustainable farming approach could be marketed to find the right people to do the right things. And I can give you a list of people that would give assistance completely free of charge in helping making sure that those opportunities are fronted. So, Ben, please.
Thank you, Robin. I mean, just in response to that first question, I am satisfied over the level of challenge that we've given to external partners to support us in this, in terms of consultation, in terms of kind of the farm business appraisals, the land elements of this, the sustainability of this. I'm satisfied that we have a robust model in place that will make use of both revenue and capital monies. That means we won't impact on national park grants on the revenue side, that we have a sufficient capital base to undertake this. Obviously, with the second recommendation in terms of those land sales, it's contingent on that, but potential for a plan B exists as well in terms of our revenue or reserves base. So yes, I am satisfied that we have sufficient resource to undertake this.
Thank you. Laura, you're next.
Thank you.
Can I just say, well done to everyone who's got it to this point. It's a huge amount of work, and it's a really good comprehensive overview. And the thing that struck me most was how inspired the staff team are, and I think that inspiration can be pushed out into the community and beyond as well. That I think the wider community will feel inspired. So for me, the most exciting thing is about the engagement around this project. So when you outline the options to keep the running of the farmhouse in-house, I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to meet our objectives. I did just want to flag, I've seen a couple of examples of similar projects elsewhere, Cameron's Cottage in the New Forest, then there's potentially some learnings from NEP. Northumberland are doing a similar piece around Hadrian's Wall nature recovery. And perhaps the opportunity to bring on NGO partners, RSPB, WWT, to help make this a success, particularly when it comes to the engagement stuff. They've got access to funds and experience in crowdfunding and bringing in groups and partnership working around this stuff. And also National Grid, whether there's pro bono conversation to be had about supporting sustainable energy there. They're part of WWT's Blue Recovery Leaders Group. I know they've worked with CMP on the VIP scheme, so they've got sort of motivation to support. So I just thought it might be worth exploring that conversation. But yeah, it sounds excellent. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, Rob and Ben. It's a very good paper, and it's great to hear the excitement from within the authority. Actually, one interest I have in the place, I stayed there for a week back in the late 70s, so I know it very well. As a point of account, so I slept there with my horse. So I know the area very well, a lot of passion for the place, and I know the chains very well. I've ridden across the chains on the horse and fallen off my horse on the chain as well. So yeah, so the excitement is great, and then I come back to from my experience in project management and leadership development, when you come across work which has got lots of work streams and lots of excitement with staff, and no doubt you'll be able to assure me this, a key thing is to join those up with some project management framework, and no doubt, I'm sure you've got that in place, but equally it's worth looking at the skills you've got and the tools you've got. If you haven't got that, I think now's the time to train up and make sure there is a project manager who's going to be a bit unpopular, because at times you're saying, no, we can't do that, this is the budget. We need to stick with that, and I mentioned to Ben, it needs managing it differently to normal accounting. I don't need to tell you that. So I think that's the key thing, I think, going forward, is reassure us how that's going to be project management. Gantt charts, risk management, time cost quality will need to be managed, which I've done a lot of myself, so I'm familiar with that area. And then the area moving on to the options going forward, I can see we're starting to look at how the conference of stewardship amount is quite large, and there's talk in there we might need cash management. You will need cash management because you do the work up front and then you get paid after. So I think that cash management will be part of project management. And when we get the options A and B presented, perhaps we can start to understand more how the tenant is going to manage the revenue stream, and how can the National Park manage the capital element if the agreement is handed over to the tenant, because there's risk in the capital, a bit of detail, but I think it's big money involved. So no, I think that but it's the project management and managing the cash flow that's going to become vital. But no, well done, good.
Thanks, Andrew. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman. Really exciting and well done indeed, Rob and your team. I think it was worth taking the amount of time we've taken to get to where we've got. So well done indeed. And I think we should certainly take on board Chairman's comments and recommendations for how we deal with the farming side of this stuff. My only concern at the moment just is a little concern about timeline on delivery of refurb and building works. And do we have a fallback position so we can, if it takes a little longer, we can deal with that? Because time you get a builder on site, even if you've got somebody who's wanting the job, it can take 18 months to get them on site. And then getting through that process. So I think that's the only sort of gap that I can see at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of things, but firstly, I just wonder, within recommendation 2, whether it should actually be subject to that land sale money, subject to, because if you don't have that, that presumably will change the dynamic of what we're hoping to do. So that was my first question. I have a couple of others.
Rob, do you want to do it on?
Thank you. What we intended was that we would bring a follow-up paper if that was the case. So the intention is to use land sale capital receipts to pay for the refurbishment. If they're not secured for some reason, then, or they're not secured to the level that we need for this paper, then we will have to bring another paper to you at that point.
Thank
And
you.
we don't know.
Reassuring.
So yeah, and we don't know what the receipts will be. And obviously, I don't want to talk too much about the commercial transactions and the interest because of the nature of it.
I understand that there's just a risk and it's quite a tight timeline, so as long as that's covered. My second question actually was around the timeline and what ultimately the decision is made as to what we want to do, option A or B or A and another option. When we look at the building, the work for the farm buildings, etc., is going to be done before that. And I suppose my question is, if someone came along with a fantastic proposal, but it included perhaps, I don't know, let's throw something, a microbrewery in the building to make all the figures stack up. If we then worked on the building and then it doesn't support that, I'm just wondering why you're doing all the building works before you know who's going to be there. So that was my next question.
Thank you. As Andrew alluded to, the farmhouse itself is in very good condition as a structure, so no structural issues, the roof covering is fine. So what the bulk of the works on the house are, they're not cosmetic, they're more than cosmetic, but they're internal works. They are focused solely on the farmhouse and the modern farm buildings. The traditional buildings we see as both a liability and both an asset, and there are no plans for those. So the sort of model that you're talking about, that diversification model, if you like, it's one kind of diversification. Those buildings are there and they're ready to be repurposed subject to the consents that are necessary and the funding that's necessary. So we would view that as some. What I'm saying is there is space for that, but those sorts of things wouldn't be in the house. You know, the house is making it as flexible as possible, but the diversification potential beyond the house is in those traditional farm buildings.
Thank you. I just wouldn't want it to hamper somebody else's plans. And the last question really is around the funding. It's sort of picking up sort of what two previous speakers have said, is around, I'm not clear from the financial risks and implications. Some of the funding streams might be managed by the authority. Some might go to the people that are there and running the land. And my challenge in my head is, how can we deliver what we want to do as a national park and have an income stream, but also you've got to consider the person that's going to be there running it, and they might need the income stream as well. So I'm not quite clear what's going where. For me, it's just about sustainability and making sure someone that goes there makes a really good job of it, delivers what we want, but also it's financially sustainable for them.
Depends partly on the operating model. And what we've done so far is we've taken advice. We've had informal discussions with other organisations who do this an awful lot and do it very, very well. For example, like the Duchy. So we had those conversations. So we are very alive to the fact that we're not going to set ourselves up to fail here, in that you make the terms for the tenants so unreasonable that they're not going to make a go of it, which is not in our interest. So we've given a lot of thought to that over the last 6 months or so. We will pick that up in finalising the operating model, because that's where it really sits, which is why I think we've allowed a bit more time to do that.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Stephen?
I don't believe anybody seconded the motion, so I am seconding the motion because I think actually we've achieved a very successful outcome to this point. I would like to commend everybody that's participated in this. I know it's been a long process, but actually this has been a very good demonstration of why sometimes you've got to tease issues through very thoroughly, and you've got to take the time you've got to take. We've reached that point now. I think it's excellent, and I'm very happy to second the motion.
I haven't seen any more hands. Oh, Evelyn.
Sorry,
A very quick, a couple of points. And can I add my congratulations to the team? And the workshop was really good, and I think it answered an awful lot of our concerns. And I think we're fairly confident that with Rob at the helm, that it's going to be head ruling heart rather than the other way round. So that's really good. I was wondering, with the headwaters and the slow the flow, is there further opportunity to work with South West Water? I know the wheels move slowly with large organisations, but there could be a funding opportunity there or a partnership that could extend beyond the land. So I think that's really worth pursuing.
I'm not sure with South West Water, but certainly that might be the case. Certainly the Environment Agency, I know, are looking at you at Exmoor, and they've indicated that to us. So potentially, you're absolutely right, that might be another.
Well, I think the water companies are now at their negotiations for the next few years, so it's a really opportune time to be talking about anything that goes into their programme.
Yes.
So that would be good. The other thing that was occurring to me as you were speaking was the cost so far. Can any of the expenditure that we've made on surveys and contractors looking at the farm be used as match funding going forward against external applications? Even the Cambridge Wildlife Trust gratis work could be ascribed a value, and that could be used for match funding. The FIPL money could be used for match funding, and even the free of charge assistance that was talked about earlier, that could be used for match funding as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind.
Definitely.
Keep a tally.
Phil?
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to second all the acclamation that's been coming from the members. I think it's a great body of work. Well done, everybody's been doing it. I've got 2 or 3 questions. One is, could the conversion of the farmhouse mean that in future it could be used for 2-family occupation, so that if it's occupied by a farming family with 2 generations, it could be easily split, was one thing. The other thing is, just on the sort of basic financial question, when we spent $750,000, will we have an asset worth $750,000 more? Because part of the discussion at the workshop was saying, if we do this, then we can still go to option 1 and 2, which have disappeared and become... Anyway, but that was the second question. The third one is, any work that we do with FIPL, does that restrict the future use of the buildings? Because I know under some grant sort of applications, you're not allowed, it has to be used for agriculture rather than anything else, you can't use it by diversification. So that was just a practical question, really, if that could be a problem going forward. Thank you.
May I get an empirical answer from the Historic Buildings Officer, please?
Regarding the farmhouse?
Regarding the traditional building and how FIPL limits its future use.
So the FIPL grant is still not particularly clear at the moment about how the use of the buildings is limited. There's a section in it that talks about not sarking roofs and things like that. But then when you speak to the FIPL team at Historic England and say that if we want to do some sort of educational use in those outbuildings, they always prick up and they say, oh, okay, so maybe some flexibility in this. So at the moment there is still some vagueness about what the restrictions are. I think their concern is that they don't want this grant money to be used for conversion of traditional buildings into holiday lets, and that's what their main concern is about. And I don't really think that's what we're talking about doing here. I can answer your question about farmhouse as well if you like in split. So Andrew and I and Rob have been speaking to Jonathan Rund Architects about the floor plan of the house and how that could potentially be divided. And there is historic evidence of the back stair. So the way the farmhouse was originally constructed is that it seems as though there was the main living area and then one end of the building formed the dairy and had a chicken apple loft above, and that had separate access. So the way we're looking at it is that potentially reintroducing a back stair and then one end of the building can be effectively self-contained. And although we've talked about B&B or let, it would ultimately be up to the tenant. We're just putting names on a floor plan really at the moment. So there is scope for dual generational use in the farmhouse.
Can I just come back? Yeah. I'm worried about Mandy's microbrewery. The FIPL, if you look on the photograph, the house is obviously at the top, and then there's what we call the East Range, which is a very narrow, thin range of buildings running north-south to the southeast of the farmhouse, if that makes any sense, near where the car's parked. That is where the FIPL grant will be spent. So that's the building that Tom's discussing. Now, on the other side of the yard, there is the West Range, which, if you remember, are two-storey buildings, the northern part of which has a new roof on it, or reasonably new roof, and had substantial renovation done in the last 20 years. So we still have options on the other buildings. Even if FIPL restricts it to educational use, we still have other buildings which can be used for diversification. I want to give the impression there's flexibility in those traditional buildings.
Now Bill wants to come back.
Sorry. Yes. Could I just come back and say that I remember the old ESA schemes when you did a conversion of a traditional agricultural building. You had to take the slates off and put slates back on without any insulation or any other protection of the roof. And I'm just thinking I think it'd be quite good if you could actually convert it and have some sort of covering underneath the slates and that sort of thing. I'm just if that's possible. So it can. I can't see it being used for keeping pigs, for instance. So it would be another use, almost certainly. So I just make sure that you can work within the rules, really.
Yeah, I do think there is some flexibility in that from DEFRA. I think if we were talking about gutting all the traditional fixings and finishes to make it a convertible space, then they would definitely be saying no to that, understandably. But I think what we're talking about should allow some level of comfort in that building, because obviously we don't want to be doing classes in there where there's wind rushing through and everybody's sat there shivering. So my impression is that there is flexibility in that grant, depending on what you're going to do with the building ultimately. But I think we should be okay on that front.
I have no more hands raised. So the recommendations were proposed by Robin and seconded by Stephen. Can I see all of those in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you so much. And could you thank the staff? And everybody said that. How enthusiastic everybody is. We are very enthusiastic as well. So item 7 is Claire's coming to talk about the progress implementing the corporate plan. And this is where we have a statement from Mr. Watt. No, his table statement.
Morning, members. So, yes, you have the paper in front of you, which is the 6-month progress report that we bring in terms of how things are going with the corporate plan. I think the headlines really are that there's been a lot of really good progress across the 6 priorities that we have in our corporate strategy. I won't go through them all, you can see them there, but just to reflect really a lot of really good work that's happening. And I think, as already been mentioned this morning, Chair's announcement, some good news in terms of things like external funding and income generation. There are a few areas where we are struggling a little bit, which are sort of noted by the amber and the red crosses. Those are things where we're limited in capacity, or we've had to make changes to teams in terms of the budget cuts. So in some respects they are to be expected, but it's showing really in terms of ability to deliver against some things. I think going forward with the current changes that are being proposed in terms of the business review, some of those things will hopefully either be resolved or will start to improve. So when we bring the full annual report to you in July next year, hopefully some of those things will have changed. But it is still obviously a challenging budgetary environment in which we're working. But that's all I wanted to say, Chair, by way of introduction, but happy to take any comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Evelyn.
First of all, I think it's amazing that so much has been achieved when the organisation has been challenged from many angles, and there are fewer of you, and it's really good to see how focused we are, and that the plans that have been put in place have actually enabled us to focus and to get the majority of things underway or done. So congratulations, and can I move the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Evelyn. Oh, and thank you very much, Dominic.
Thanks for the update, and just happy to second the recommendation, but also just a couple of questions. One on doing in the wrong order, but the corporate priority 2 on access. Just mentioning, which we've talked about before, is the impact of budget cuts on the work being able to be done on rights of way and paring back and all the rest of it, and the fact you mentioned that complaints have already been received. I'm wondering, do we ever do, I don't know how we do it, so this probably isn't a very helpful comment, but do we do any way of working out, or would DEFRA ever share this information? Under countryside stewardship, certainly on the last round, because my agreement just finished, one of the agreements that we had in our countryside stewardship was for the paring back of the bridleway. So we received money for that, so I'd go down there with my strimmer and I'd do it. Now, I can't be the only landowner in Exmoor who's done that, who has the funding to do it, but I guess we would never know who has the funding to do it. And I worry sometimes whether some of these complaints actually are misdirected, and actually should be directed towards the landowner who has failed to do the paring back, even though they may well have received public money to do so. And I'm not quite sure how on earth you find a way through that particular thicket of brambles, but best of luck. The other issue is on our friend, the Nature Recovery Vision, in my ongoing habit of trying to bring this up at every meeting, because lest it gets forgotten. And I suppose my problem, I see that you've made some points here around nature recovery connected issues without necessarily grappling with the Nature Recovery Vision itself. Now, of course, this is complicated by the announcement last week about the landscapes review and what's happening with that, and how we're now going to be expected to integrate with other nature recovery visions and all the rest of it. So again, this is yet another bramble thicket to get lost in. But I do think, and we talked about this the other day, is if we're trying to get to a point of some measurable differences in nature by 2030, then really by 2025 we've got to have some sort of midterm review of where we're at with that. Now, that raises a budgetary issue, because doing that kind of analysis is expensive. You need people actually out to do it. Citizen science could be involved in this, as we saw earlier with the Driver Farm thing. Actually, maybe there's a connection to Driver Farm and the Pioneer project. In fact, there almost certainly is now I think of it. But at some point, without I don't want to sort of set an ambition to do a very comprehensive midterm review of where we are with nature recovery right across the whole of Exmoor in 2025. That isn't realistic. But something along those lines that aims towards that, if we're going to do it in 2025, we've got to start planning it now and putting that in place. So that's the only thing I think. And again, that sends a signal as well that the nature recovery vision is still alive and well. It is something we're actually working towards, and it's something we're still committed to. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you for raising all those points. So, on the nature recovery vision, the document itself, I believe, is pretty much ready to be launched, which is great. But I think the actions that we've listed here are obviously all really related to delivering that vision. And the key thing that it also links to is the partnership plan. So the targets in the vision will be being included in the partnership plan as well. So that gives us another statutory, reason for monitoring and reporting against those. We have just recently, actually, at the last Nature Conservation Advisory Panel, had that very conversation with our partners around how we're going to do that monitoring and how we're going to, review progress and how things are going. So you're absolutely right in flagging all those issues, and they are things that we're actively looking to take forward. I think, as always, the big issues in terms of reviewing progress are around data and evidence for that. So that's very much part of the thinking as well in terms of how do we line things up. So some of the things that are talked about in here about the SSSI monitoring, for example, and projects have their own monitoring. So things, projects that we've been implementing, obviously we will get information from those. But I think there's plenty that's going on to respond to those comments, and it's very much accepted and acknowledged that we need to do that. So I think hopefully that provides some clarification and reassurance that those matters are in hand. Thank you.
Now, can I just check that everybody's seen the statement from Mr. Watts, which is put in front of you? Very eloquent statement, I thought, actually. Beautifully written. And does anybody have any further questions following that? Francis?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Could you put your microphone on, Francis?
Sorry, absolutely following Roger Watt's interest entirely. So design guide, absolutely appreciate that it's really difficult to keep up the momentum on that with the difficulties that you've got. But it is absolutely relevant to the landscape. And just, I know that the timetable has to be pushed back again. What is the timetable? And how long, by the time we get there, how many years will it be since the current one was produced?
The current one was produced in 1996. There was but I believe there was a sort of an attempt to update it in the mid 2006, something like that, or yeah. So it is long overdue. I mean, that's not to say that the current one, is still used. There's still some very good things in there, and all we were trying to do at this point in time was update it and present it, in a more up-to-date version, really. So we have made some really good progress with it. A lot of it is drafted, but part of the reason, I'm not making excuses here because I think you are very aware of reasons that we're struggling is because of capacity, but part of the reason we have not completely pushed it forward is because of all the changes that are happening nationally, and you understand obviously there is this now requirement to do a design code, and we sort of want to not rush ahead with what we're doing and then find that we've got to do something completely different. So we are deliberately holding back a little bit from that in that regard. The time frame is at the moment is that we're going to regroup in the new year and look at what we can realistically deliver in terms of a sort of setting a time frame for ourselves. I'm hoping that that would be fairly quick because there isn't a huge amount to be done, but possibly, you know, certainly by the middle of next year, I hope we would have something, you know, sort of final in your hands. But at this moment, I can't say for certain because, you know, it obviously depends a little bit on all of the staffing changes and what happens nationally as well. So it is very much still there as a aspiration that we know we have to do it because we have to do it, you know, in terms of the national requirements. But it's just being able to find the time to carve out to do it really.
So you're aiming for the middle of next year, is that what you're doing?
Yes, I think that's probably my best estimate at this point in time. Thank you.
Any more hands? Oh, Mandy.
Thank you. Just to say congratulations to the staff. I'm always amazed at the level and depth of the body of work that you have to undertake in a year, and it's great to see so many greens. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, around pressures on the recreation and access team are limiting the development of projects to make use of DEFRA special funding. It says there are some suitable projects being identified. In reality, do you think we will be able to deliver them? It's never nice sending any funding back to anybody. So that's the first question.
I believe so. I think at the moment the issue is a sort of a short-term capacity one, and the intention is that this is for money to be spent next year. So we're as keen as you in terms of not, you know, losing money that's there. But I think it was just reflecting the fact that there is, you know, there is that ongoing pressure on the team. It's great when these opportunities come up for extra funding, but you have to put the resource in to be able to secure it, which impacts on things that, you know, you're doing in terms of the day-to-day delivery of the service and other things that are already, you know, programmed in. So I think it's more of a recognition of that. That is always a bit of a challenge. But no, if there's any further update, I can obviously inform members of that. But I think that is the situation at the moment, is that the intention is that it would be for projects to deliver next year, but it's putting the work in this year in order to secure that is the current constraint.
Thank you. My second question is around, this is all about delivery of corporate action plans, and referring to the last item, is there actually capacity to do all that driver work within the team that's here? I don't underestimate how much work it is, how much more work there is still to do, and is that all factored within the sort of plan of the whole authority?
Definitely. So the idea is really that what we're trying to do with the priorities and the funding that's coming in is to focus it and our existing core team on delivering that. So any project funding that we get is around targeting that on things that we want to do with our own land as well as more widely, and using as far as we can, you know, sort of core staff, backfilling, you know, core staff time to do that. So that's what we're sort of designing our delivery around. So it's not on top of what they're already doing.
Thank you. I know everybody's stretched, so thank you for that.
John.
Thanks. Yes. I'd like obviously to echo what everybody else has said about the amount of stuff that's done. It's amazing to think that all this is done by just over 50 full-time equivalents. And imagine if you had 80 again. But one point that I've lost it, that I was going to raise, only because I've been pressed by a councillor to raise it. It's about ENIS, the non-invasive species project, which is described as successfully delivered. And they were just saying that Japanese knotweed particularly, even though you knock it back, hasn't really gone away. Now, I know it takes forever to do that, but because I promised him I'd raise it, I thought I would say so.
Yeah. So, yes. So I mean, it's an ongoing. It's never going to go away, frankly. And you know, and I know there are debates about, you know, well, should you just keep on trying to control it? But obviously, it is a very invasive and, you know, potentially damaging plant. So the project is intended to keep it under control. It's not intended to eradicate it. Unfortunately, that's probably just never likely to be possible. So without the control programme, it would be much more rampant than it is at the moment. And I think the project is trialling this root wave, which is the sort of electric shock to the roots, which is because obviously otherwise it's it's using chemicals. You can't do that in some sites because they're organic, or it'd be wider problems. So yes, it's an ongoing programme because that's the only way that you're going to keep it under control. And the same with the other invasive species to an extent. They are in the landscape, they are in the environment, and if left unchecked, they would spread.
Thanks, I'll tell them again.
I like going to indulge myself now. I rarely do this, but nobody else has mentioned about the backlog of local heritage list sites, and I note that with quite some alarm. Because once these things are lost, they're lost. Do we have any comment on that?
So this is in terms of a capacity to put entries onto the historic environment records. So as you're aware, our historic environment records officer left, and we have held that vacancy as part of our, balancing the budgets. This is one of the ones where I mentioned that plans that we've got in place at the moment that we are consulting staff on is intended to address that. And because there is now a statutory requirement for us to have a historic environment record, we will be making sure that we have resource, and Rob is working on that at the moment and is actually discussing with Devon County and I think Cornwall, other local authorities who have to do this, where we might be able to collaborate to do it a little bit more efficiently and effectively. So yes, thank you.
I wasn't saying because it was Devon, but I just think that we do need to note that we do have to do this, and nobody else had raised it, so I made sure that it is minuted that it has now been raised. So we've shown some concern. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Jade. Just on that last point, I have been requested to assist in that, so things are moving on. I'm happy to accept that invitation. Unless it's been moved, I don't think it has been. It has been moved?
It has been proposed by Evelyn and seconded by John. Thank you. I have no more hands raised unless I've missed seeing somebody. So can we move to the vote? All those in favour? That's unanimous, Judy. Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. And you're staying with us, I believe. So item 8 is amendments to standing orders and code of conduct, and Claire is here to take us through it again.
Ably assisted by Andrew. And thank you. Thank you to Andrew for his work on this. Actually, he's done a lot of the work, and Judy. Yes. So this is amendments to standing orders and code of conduct. This is basically reflecting the changes that members agreed in November to reduce the number of meetings, to set up a separate planning committee. So in order to do that, we had to amend the standing orders, and actually we did find as well there were some changes to code of conduct that was needed. So you have a sort of a marked up version of those documents in the appendices to approve. And the other thing, two things to note is, one, that there are times when there are just some really minor updates that are needed in terms of corrections to terminology or references or legislation, which we're suggesting could be done without needing to bring it back to authority, because there's no sort of policy decision or anything involved in that. It is just sort of updates or corrections. So that was one thing. And the other was that in the report under section 2, I just wanted to note that in terms of appointments to the new planning committee, we're aiming to do that by April, because the intention is to start the trial from April onwards. But it wouldn't really make sense to make the appointments and then have to redo them in July at the AGM, which is when we would normally do member appointments. So we're proposing that we carry forward the planning committee member appointments to the following year, should it continue. Obviously, it is a trial, so if it didn't continue, then it would go back to how things are now. So that was just the other thing I wanted to flag up with members so that you're aware of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. John. Chairman of the Standards Committee.
That's me, Chairman of the Standards Committee, yeah. So I've already seen all this. I mean, we've seen it a couple of times. And like Claire said, it's really just tidying up to reflect previous decisions taken by the authority, so happy to move it.
Thank you. Stephen.
If John was proposing it, as Deputy Chairman of the Standards Committee, I will second it.
Thank you so much. Does anybody want to ask any questions? Bill?
Under the scheme of delegation 4.2, it says that all members that are on the planning committee will have had to have attended 2 training sessions. But obviously, if you've only just come on, you won't be able to. You will have done one when you came onto the authority, but you won't have done 2. So it looks as if that all members are required to attend a minimum of 2 obligatory planning and development management training sessions in the 24-month period. Failure to do so would mean that a member is ineligible to sit on the planning committee. So until they've attended. So I don't know. It's a bit. I'm sure it doesn't mean that. I assume it means that if you've done 1 training session and you've just arrived, you are still eligible on the planning committee. But it actually reads that you need to have done 2. So that was the only thing I noticed.
The chairman of the current planning.
Well, I think you can do 2 training sessions on 1 day.
You can.
So I would imagine that actually when you're a new member, actually it's counted that you've done 1 bit of training at 11 o'clock and another bit of training at 1 o'clock. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
I wasn't worried. No, I wasn't worried. Sorry, Chairman. So that was just wanted to make sure. Sometimes in future it may be important that it's clear exactly what it means. So.
Did you want to add anything there, Claire?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, yes, that is correct in terms of, what the standing orders require. But obviously, we do quite a lot of member training in terms of briefing and updates to you. So, for example, you've had the biodiversity net gain, so that would all count towards it. So okay. I think, in practice, is what I'm saying, there's not an issue in terms of anybody standing for planning committees should they wish to do so.
Andy?
Just a small matter, and again it's in 4.4. So you haven't put in there explicitly that substitute member also needs to have undergone the training. And second day, to provide notice to Chief Executive at least 10 working days before the committee meeting. That seems an awfully long time, 10 days on reading it. So I wondered if it needed to be that long, because things happen in life.
This came up at the Standards Committee, didn't it? I remember that. Claire?
So I think this is the intention, for example, if you're going on holiday and you know in advance and you can give notice, and therefore there is plenty of time, A, for Judy in administering the, things to know that that's happening, and B, for the member to be able to, read the papers, etc. If it's a last-minute illness, then we have given that, exceptional circumstances element where it can be a shorter time period. But that was what was considered to be reasonable, really, in the grand scheme of things.
Bill likes this subject.
Sorry, we also had a long discussion about social media and the way that reflects on the way the authority works, but there's nothing here, is there, on social media, or have I missed something?
So there's a reference in the Code of Conduct to social media, but it refers you to the policy, the authority's policy on social media. And following the Standards Committee discussions on this, what we're planning to do is look at updating the policy and putting in place some refresher training for all members around social media. So I don't think we felt that we needed to sort of make any changes in the standing orders or code of conduct, but we will reflect that discussion in the policy and training.
Laura?
Thank you, Andrea. Just on 4.1, the membership, it's got the division of where the members come from, Secretary of State, councils, etc. I just wondered if there was anything in there to ensure diversity, so we don't get an all-male planning committee, for example, or all landowners. I don't know if you can do that.
I think that just gets too complicated.
Yeah.
I think we've just got to accept that it's just where we've been appointed for.
Okay.
And I'm sure that everybody will be, remember,
Mindful.
yeah,
Okay.
what they are there to do. Marcus?
I think the answer to that is get a more diverse committee in the first place to choose from, I think, but we live in hope, maybe. What I was going to pick up on Mandy's point about the 10 days and what's an exceptional circumstance, because up to 8:30 this morning I was going to be here on time. But kids, are they an exceptional circumstance? Because that was the issue this morning. So, so I think, we see it, another authority quite a lot where there's WhatsApp messages going on half an hour before the meeting. Can someone sub for me? Because things happen. So I just think, I'd hate someone to be breaching standing orders and for somebody to making a decision whether what was exceptional, what wasn't really. I'd have it down to prior to the meeting started almost. But anyway,
I think we'll be able to manage that one. Okay.
There doesn't have to be a substitute. It's the option to provide. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, the point is it's the option to provide a substitute rather than you having to provide a substitute.
And having been a substitute on various things in the past, I have to say it is helpful not to get a phone call that morning to say, can you go and substitute for me? Because the answer to that is probably going to be, absolutely no, I cannot get there. So, I think it's just about being mindful of other people, because the substitutes won't be being prepared for it, but there's a lot of reading to do. So if you know you're not going to be available, should you end up on the committee, it'd be really kind if you'd let those of us that might not be on the committee know well in advance if you're going on holiday. Stephen?
Can I just remind everybody about 4.3, which says that if you are going to be a substitute, you do have to have had the training. And so therefore it is absolutely, in my view, almost certainly essential that all members should undergo the training. So I think we should all put ourselves in the way of being trained, even if you're not anticipating sitting on the planning committee as a full member.
I think that's good practice anyway. Says she that never went on any planning training in North Devon, but I'll just keep quiet now. Andrew?
Thank you. Do we know how we're going to appoint or how we're going to select people for the planning process?
I'd love it that I just said, but I don't think that's going to happen. How's that going to happen?
So we'll send out nominations probably in the new year, and then there will be a paper that will come to authority as usual, the way that we normally do our nominations, and there'll be either it will work and there'll be a certain number of members who put themselves forward for it, or there'll need to be a vote in terms of who is appointed. But that's how it would normally work. And as I said, that would normally then happen at the AGM in July when we do all the other member appointments. Same process.
Can I urge you in your respective groups that you point from that you all have a nice little chat, over a cup of tea and a piece of cake, and try and organise yourselves. It'll be really helpful rather than having to go through endless rounds of voting, which really is terribly tedious and takes up such a lot of time. So it's beholden on you all to go and have a little chat. So Jerry and I will have a little chat, I'm sure, won't we?
I will listen.
Yeah. Very swiftly on. We have a proposer and a seconder for this, don't we? Yes. John and Evelyn. Evelyn and John. Any more questions before we go? Oh, sorry, it was John. This is getting out of hand, especially from people that are on the standards committee. Right. Can I see the hands, please? All those in favour? And that's again unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Are you staying a little longer? So item 9 is it's self-explanatory. It's the proposed withdrawal and dissolution of the Hartlepool South West Joint Committee. I have to say the reason this is coming before us and it's going in front of Devon County Council on Thursday is because when they held the meeting, which they forgot to invite us to, I go back to my point of if you don't tell me there's a meeting I can't attend it, there wasn't enough members present to actually vote on this, so we've all got to do it separately. It's very simple and quick. Chief Executive.
I so propose.
Thank you so much. The hints did not fall on stony ground there. Very fertile. So proposed by...
Proposed without debate.
Thank you. And Stephen's going to second. All those in favour? Thank you so much. Personal update, it's all there for you, and I have no matters of business of urgency. Therefore, I'm going to close the meeting. Well done, everybody.